I've lived long enough to notice something about men who run. They don't run from trouble, they run from the people who love them. Because staying close means facing what they can't. I watched it happen once, on the African plains, with a man, his old dog, and something neither expected to find. The dog wouldn't stop whimpering. Daniel Mercer had worked with Quito for 9 years. He'd never heard that sound low, rising from somewhere deeper than instinct. The grass parted. He saw her. A lion cub, 4 months old, maybe less, ribs pressing through dull fur, one hind leg caught in snare wire. The skin beneath was raw, swollen. She didn't snarl, her amber eyes tracked him, but the fight was gone. Quito inched forward, sniffed. The cub didn't flinch. Daniel reached for his radio. Static. Behind him. Quito paced, returned. The dog wanted him to follow. 20 meters north. The smell hit first. Then he saw the lioness. Single bullet wound. Still warm. We'd love to know where you're watching from today. Drop a comment and say hello, and if you've been enjoying these stories. A quick subscribe helps us keep bringing you tales like this one. Thank you kindly. The outpost sat 3 kilometers from the river, 3 buildings, paint peeling in long curls, a generator that coughed to life most mornings, silent on others. Daniel had lived here 15 years. Red dust coated everything: the windowsills, the dashboard of his Jeep, the creases in his knuckles. He'd stopped noticing it years ago. Now it was just part of him, like the ache in his left knee or the gray pushing through at his temples. Acacia trees dotted the landscape, thorns long as thumbnails. Weaver bird nests hung from branches like paper lanterns. The river marked the boundary-protected land on one side, lawless territory on the other. He knelt beside the cub, working the snare wire with pliers that had seen better decades. Quito stood guard 3 feet away, ears swiveling at every rustle. The wire had cut deep. Infection already setting in, he could smell it, that sour, sweet rot beneath the copper tang of dried blood. 58 years old. 28 of them in conservation. He'd started outside Missoula, back when Ellen used to pack his lunches in brown paper bags with little notes inside. She'd told him to go to Africa. Go save something, she'd said, and she'd meant it. 7 years ago, she'd stopped saying anything at all. Stage 4? Nathan had called from Virginia, his voice strange and tight. She's asking for you. Dad. Daniel had been 3 weeks into tracking the largest poaching network in the northern sector. 2 more weeks, he'd told himself. Just 2 more weeks. Ellen died on a Tuesday morning, Montana time. Daniel had been watching the sunrise over the Serengeti. At the funeral, Nathan stood on the opposite side of the grave. His last words landed like stones in frozen ground. You had a choice. You made it. 7 years of birthday cards sent to the same address. 7 years of silence in return. The cub whimpered. Daniel looked down. The wire was loose now, but her leg hung wrong, the joint swollen to twice its size. Behind him, Quito growled low, sustained, aimed at something Daniel couldn't see. He turned. The grass moved, not wind. Something heavier. Daniel's hand went to his belt, radio, knife, nothing else. And then, from the direction of the dead lioness, came a sound that stopped his breath. Footsteps. Human. Daniel's fingers closed around the knife handle. Quito's growl deepened. The grass parted. A man stepped through, tall, dark-skinned, ranger uniform. James Okonkwo. Daniel's grip loosened. He let out a breath he hadn't known he was holding. You're off your patrol route. James stopped 3 meters away, his eyes moving from Daniel to the cub to the direction of the dead lioness. I radioed. You didn't answer. Dead zone. James walked past him, stopped at the edge of the clearing where the lioness lay. He stood there a long moment, hands on his hips, saying nothing. When he turned back, his face had hardened. The Maseko ring, same snare type, same caliber. James pulled out his radio, tried a frequency. Static. Another frequency, more static. He clipped it back to his belt. Headquarters is sending a vehicle. I hiked in from the North Ridge when you didn't respond. He looked at the cub. What's the plan here? She needs transport, medical attention. The infection's already spreading. Daniel. James's voice carried that careful weight it always did before he said something Daniel didn't want to hear. We have 3 rangers covering 200 square kilometers. The northern outpost needs a new radio. Budget reviews in 2 weeks. She'll die without treatment. She'll probably die with it. The words hung in the dry air. A vulture circled overhead. Patient, unhurried. Daniel didn't look up. He knelt beside the cub again, checking the wrap on her leg. The bleeding had slowed, but her breathing came in shallow stutters. I'm taking her in. James exhaled through his nose. You do that, and every report for the next month asks why we spent resources on one animal with a 10% chance. Then let them ask. It's not that simple. You know it's not. James moved closer, lowering his voice even though there was no one else to hear. The retirement paperwork for Quito? It's due Friday. Headquarters isn't asking anymore. They're telling... Daniel's hand stilled on the cub's flank. You've been dodging those forms for 6 months. James continued. I've covered for you. I can't keep doing that. He's not ready. He's 9 years old. His hips are failing. Last month he couldn't clear a 3-foot gully. He cleared it. He fell. I saw it. Daniel said nothing. His jaw tightened. Quito lay nearby, head on his paws, watching them both. The gray around his muzzle had spread in the past year. His breathing came heavier now after even short treks. Daniel had noticed. He'd noticed everything. The vehicle will be here in 2 hours, James said. I'll authorize transport for the cub, but the paperwork. I heard you. James studied him for a long moment. Then he turned and walked back toward the ridge, his boots crushing the dry grass with each step. Daniel watched him go. The sun climbed higher. Sweat traced a line down his spine, soaking into his shirt. The cub's eyes had closed, her small chest rising and falling in an uneven rhythm. Quito rose, walked to the cub, lay down beside her, not touching, but close enough that she could feel his warmth. The cub's breathing steadied. Daniel reached for his canteen, poured a small amount of water into his palm, held it near the cub's muzzle. She didn't respond at first. Then her tongue moved, a weak lap. Another. 2 hours. The vehicle would take 2 hours. He looked at the lioness again. 20 meters away. Flies had already gathered. By nightfall, the hyenas would come. By morning, there would be nothing left but bones and hide. She'd been crawling toward the river when she died, toward her cub, and the poachers hadn't even bothered to collect their shell casing. Brass, still visible in the dirt, confident, careless. 7 years ago, Daniel had tracked this same network. He'd been 3 weeks into the operation when Ellen got sick. He'd told himself 2 more weeks, just 2 more weeks, and he'd fly home. The poachers had vanished into the bush. Never caught. And Ellen had died alone. Daniel picked up the shell casing, turned it over in his fingers. The brass was warm from the sun. He'd given up everything for this work, his wife, his son, his chance at a normal life, and the poachers were still here, still killing. The cub whimpered. Quito's ears twitched. Daniel pocketed the casing and returned to the cub's side. He checked her pulse weak, but steady. Checked the wrap holding. Checked the swelling unchanged. The vultures had been joined by 2 others. They circled lower now. Daniel pulled the cub closer to Quito, positioning her in the dog's shadow, out of the direct sun. She didn't resist. Her body felt too light, too fragile. He sat back on his heels, waited. The heat pressed down. Minutes stretched. Then Quito's head lifted. His ears rotated forward, not toward the river, toward the bush behind them. Daniel turned. The grass moved again, and this time he saw what Quito had sensed: tire tracks. Fresh ones, cutting through the dirt 50 meters west. The poachers hadn't left. They were still here. Daniel dropped low, hand on Quito's collar. The dog's muscles coiled beneath his grip. The tire tracks cut through the dry grass in the parallel lines, heading northwest. Recent, the edges still sharp, not yet softened by wind or animal passage. He calculated the distance: 50 meters to the tracks. Maybe 200 to wherever the vehicle had stopped. The cub lay exposed, too injured to move, too weak to survive on her own. Daniel pulled her closer to a dense thicket of acacia scrub. Thorns snagged his shirt, drew thin lines of blood along his forearm. He ignored them. "Stay," he whispered to Quito. The dog's eyes tracked him, questioning. Daniel crawled to the edge of the clearing, keeping his profile below the grass line. He listened. Wind through dry stalks. The distant call of a fish eagle. Nothing mechanical. No voices. He waited. 1 minute, 2. His radio crackled. He nearly dropped it, fumbling for the volume. James's voice, broken by static, vehicle en route. 20 minutes. Copy. Daniel pressed the transmit button, kept his voice low. Fresh tire tracks near my position, northwest bearing. Poachers may still be in the area. Silence. Then, hold your position. Do not engage. Repeat, do not engage. Understood. He clipped the radio back to his belt, returned to the cub. Quito hadn't moved. His body formed a barrier between the thicket and the open grassland, gray fur almost invisible against the dried vegetation. The cub's breathing had grown shallower. Her eyes remained closed. Daniel checked her pulse. Still there, a faint flutter beneath his fingertips. He wet a cloth from his canteen, squeezed drops of water onto her tongue. Her throat worked once, twice, 20 minutes. He positioned himself beside Quito, facing the direction of the tire tracks. His knife felt inadequate in his hand, a blade against whatever firepower those men carried. The sun pressed down. Sweat pooled in the hollow of his throat, soaked through the back of his shirt. He thought about the shell casing in his pocket. Brass, .375 caliber. The same caliber he'd documented 7 years ago, in the same sector, tracking the same network, 3 weeks into that operation. Nathan had called. "Dad, you need to come home. It's Mom." 2 more weeks. Daniel had told himself. The network was close to exposure. 2 more weeks, and he'd fly back. Be there for the final months. Hold Ellen's hand while she... The network had vanished, scattered into the bush like smoke. And Ellen had died on a Tuesday morning, alone except for Nathan and a hospice nurse whose name Daniel couldn't remember. He'd made it back for the funeral. Stood in a Montana cemetery in a suit that didn't fit anymore, watching them lower the casket into frozen ground. Nathan had stood on the opposite side, not looking at him. Afterward. In the church parking lot. "You had a choice. Dad, you made it." That was the last full sentence his son had spoken to him. Quito's ears rotated. Daniel tensed. An engine. Distant but approaching. He gripped his knife, watched the grass. The sound grew louder, coming from the southeast, the direction of the outpost. A jeep crested the small rise, dust billowing behind it. Daniel recognized the vehicle. Conservation Authority markings on the door. He stood, waved. The Jeep pulled up 20 meters away. 2 rangers climbed out young, both of them. Local recruits Daniel had trained 18 months ago. "Mr. Mercer?" The taller one jogged over. "Mr. Okonkwo said you found a cub. She's in the thicket. Careful, the leg's badly infected." They worked together, lifting the cub onto a canvas stretcher. She whimpered once, then went still. Quito followed, staying close to the stretcher as they carried it to the Jeep. "There are poachers in the area," Daniel said. "Fresh tracks. 50 meters northwest. Notify Mr. Okonkwo." "Already done, sir." "He's organizing a patrol." They loaded the cub into the back of the Jeep. Daniel climbed in beside her. Quito jumped up without being asked, positioning himself at her side. The younger ranger glanced back. The dog, too. The dog, too. They drove. The road, if it could be called that, bucked and twisted through the bush. Daniel braced the stretcher with one hand, kept the other on Quito's back. The cub's eyes opened once during the journey. Amber, clouded with pain. They fixed on Quito for a long moment before closing again. Daniel reached into his shirt pocket. His fingers found the photograph edges worn soft from years of handling. Ellen and Nathan, 15 years ago. Nathan, maybe 17. Both of them laughing at something off camera. He didn't look at it, just held it between his fingers, feeling the weight of the paper. The rescue center appeared as the sun touched the western hills. 3 buildings, whitewashed walls. A woman standing at the gate, arms crossed. Ruth Parker. 62 years old. Gray hair pulled back tight. Hands that had stitched up everything from eagles to elephants. She didn't waste time with greetings. "How long since the injury?" 36 hours, maybe more." "Infection?" "Yes, spreading fast." Ruth looked at the cub, then at Quito. Her eyebrows rose slightly. "The dog stays outside. He won't leave her. This is a sterile environment, Mr. Mercer." Daniel met her gaze, held it. Ruth exhaled through her nose. "Fine. Outside the enclosure. He touches nothing." They carried the cub into the treatment room. Ruth moved with the efficiency of someone who had done this 1,000 times, checking vitals, probing the wound, barking orders at her assistant. Daniel stood in the corner, useless, watching. Ruth worked for 20 minutes without speaking. Then she straightened, stripped off her gloves. 40% chance. Maybe less. The infection's already in her bloodstream. She paused. "She might have another 48 hours before we know which way this goes. What do you need? Time? Medicine we're running low on? Luck?" "I can't help with luck." "No." Ruth looked at him. Something shifted in her expression, curiosity, perhaps, or recognition. "You're not the first ranger to bring in a lost cause, Mr. Mercer." "I know. So, why are you still here?" Daniel didn't have an answer. His eyes moved to the window, where Quito lay pressed against the glass, nose nearly touching the surface. Inside the enclosure, the cub's small chest rose and fell. Outside, the light was failing, and somewhere in the bush, men with guns were waiting for darkness. The rescue center smelled of antiseptic and dried grass. Daniel sat on a wooden bench outside the treatment room, his back against the whitewashed wall, watching the last light drain from the sky. Quito lay at his feet. The dog hadn't moved in 2 hours. Through the window, Daniel could see Ruth working. Her hands moved with precision, adjusting IV lines, checking monitors, making notes on a clipboard. The cub lay motionless on the examination table, her small body almost lost beneath the tangle of tubes and wires. 40% chance. Maybe less. Daniel had heard those odds before. Different circumstances, same weight. The door opened. Ruth stepped out, pulling off surgical gloves. Her face gave nothing away. "She's stable. For now. What does that mean? It means she's not dead yet. Ruth dropped onto the bench beside him. The infection's aggressive. I've started her on broad-spectrum antibiotics, but her system's compromised. Dehydration, malnutrition, trauma. She rubbed her eyes with the heels of her hands. The next 48 hours will tell us more than I can. Daniel nodded, said nothing. Ruth studied him. You've been here 4 hours. Don't you have somewhere to be? Not particularly. The outpost. James is handling it. She made a sound that might have been a laugh. James Okonkwo. That man's been handling everything for the past 3 years while you— She stopped, shook her head. Never mind. While I what? Ruth looked at him directly. Her eyes were sharp, assessing. While you hide out here pretending the world stopped spinning. Daniel's jaw tightened. He didn't respond. I've been doing this work for 30 years, Mr. Mercer. I know what it looks like when a man's running from something. She stood, brushed dust from her trousers. There's coffee in the back room. Cot 2. If you need it, I'll check on her every 2 hours. She walked away before he could answer. Daniel sat in the growing darkness. The generator hummed somewhere behind the building. Moths gathered at the single light above the door, their wings making soft tapping sounds against the glass. Quito lifted his head, whined. I know, boy. The dog rose, walked to the window, pressed his nose against it. Inside, the cub hadn't moved. Daniel watched them, the old dog and the orphaned cub, separated by glass and circumstance, connected by something he couldn't name. He thought about Ellen, the way she used to watch him from the kitchen window when he worked in the yard. That particular expression, half smile, half worry that he'd never fully understood until it was too late. The night settled in. Stars emerged, thick and bright. Daniel didn't move from the bench. 3 days passed. Quito barely ate. He slept outside the cub's enclosure, nose pressed to the gap beneath the door. When Daniel tried to bring him food, the dog would sniff it once, then turn back to his vigil. Ruth noticed. He's going to make himself sick, she said on the second morning. Dogs his age can't skip meals like that. He won't leave her. I can see that. Ruth crossed her arms, watching Quito through the corridor window. 30 years I've done this work. I've never seen a dog act that way for a cat. He found her. I think he feels responsible. Dogs don't feel responsible. They feel instinct. Daniel shrugged. Maybe instinct is enough. Ruth didn't argue. She brought a bowl of water and set it near Quito's head. The dog drank without moving from his position. What about you? She asked. What about me? You've been here 3 days, sleeping on that cot, eating whatever I put in front of you. She tilted her head. You got people back home, Mr. Mercer. The question landed like a stone in still water. Used to. Ruth waited. When he didn't elaborate, she nodded slowly. I know that pause. Lived inside it for 3 years myself. Your husband, Alzheimer's, the long goodbye. They call it. She looked toward the window, toward something Daniel couldn't see. By the end, he didn't know my name, didn't know his own. But when I walked in the room, something in his face would change. Some part of him still recognized. She stopped, cleared her throat. Well, ancient history now. Daniel said nothing. There was nothing to say. Ruth straightened. The cub's fever spiked last night. I changed the antibiotic protocol. We'll know by morning if it's working. She walked away, her footsteps echoing on the concrete floor. Daniel returned to his position outside the enclosure. Quito hadn't moved. Through the window, the cub's chest rose and fell in shallow, uneven rhythms. The crisis came on the 3rd night. Daniel woke to the sound of alarms, red lights flashing in the corridor, Ruth's voice, sharp and urgent, cutting through the darkness. He stumbled from the cot, disoriented, found the treatment room, pushed through the door. Ruth stood over the cub, hands moving fast. Her temperature's spiking, heart rate's erratic. "Hold this." She shoved an IV bag into his hands. He held it above his head. Watching the fluid drip into the tube, the cub convulsed, small body arching off the table, legs scrambling against nothing. "Hold her down. Gently, gently." I said. Daniel pressed his free hand against the cub's shoulder. Her fur was hot, dry. He could feel each rib beneath the skin. Ruth injected something into the IV line, checked the monitors, injected something else. The seconds stretched. Daniel's arm ached from holding the IV bag overhead. His hand pressed against the cub's trembling body, feeling each shudder pass through her. Finally, the convulsions stopped. The cub went limp. Ruth checked her pulse, her breathing, the readouts on the monitor. "She's stable." Daniel lowered the IV bag slowly. His shoulder burned from the strain. What happened? The infection triggered a systemic response. Her body was trying to fight it off and overcompensated. Ruth wiped sweat from her forehead with the back of her wrist. "I've seen it before. Sometimes they pull through, sometimes they don't." And Ruth looked at the cub, at the monitors, at Daniel. "Ask me again in 12 hours. They stood in silence. The machines beeped their steady rhythms. Outside the window, Quito paced back and forth, his shadow passing across the glass. "You should get some sleep," Ruth said. "So should you. I've done this 1,000 times. You haven't." Daniel didn't move. "I'll stay." Ruth studied him for a long moment. Then she pulled a second chair to the bedside and sat down. "Fine. We'll both stay." The night wore on. Ruth dozed in her chair, waking every hour to check vitals. Daniel sat rigid, watching the monitors, watching the cub, watching the gray light slowly fill the eastern windows. At 5:47 a.m., the cub opened her eyes, amber, clouded, but open. Ruth checked the temperature, checked it again. The fever broke. Daniel looked at the cub looked at Quito through the window. Something passed between them. Recognition, maybe. Or something simpler. The acknowledgement of one survivor to another. "She's going to make it," Ruth said quietly. "I don't know how, but she's going to make it." The weeks that followed blurred together. The cub grew stronger, ate, moved, showed flashes of personality that Ruth said were good signs: curiosity, irritation, the occasional swipe at her handlers, and she responded to Quito. Whenever the dog approached her enclosure, her ears would perk forward. She'd press her face against the wire, trying to get closer. When he left to eat or relieve himself, she'd watch the door until he returned. Ruth called it trauma bonding. It's not true, imprinting more like associative attachment. He was the first safety she knew after everything fell apart. Her brain made a connection. Daniel understood. He recognized the behavior. He'd spent 15 years doing the same thing, attaching himself to work, to purpose, to anything that felt like safety, anything that kept him from facing what he'd lost. By the third week, the cub managed to stand. Her injured leg dragged, but she stood. Quito pressed his nose to the wire. The cub reached through with one paw, batting at his muzzle. The dog didn't flinch, didn't pull away. He sat there with the patience of something very old and very tired, letting her swat at him until she wore herself out. Ruth watched from the doorway. 30 years in this work, Mr. Mercer. 30 years of animals and injuries and miracles and losses. I've never seen anything like that. Daniel didn't answer. He was watching the cub's eyes amber, clear now, fixed on the old dog with something that looked almost like trust. He thought about Nathan. The last time they'd been in the same room, the funeral, the cemetery, the parking lot afterward. You had a choice. Dad. You made it. 7 years of silence. 7 years of birthday cards sent to an address that never changed, with no response that ever came. The Jeep arrived at noon. Daniel heard it before he saw it, the familiar engine noise, the crunch of tires on gravel. He stepped outside, shading his eyes against the sun. James Okonkwo climbed out of the driver's seat. His face was set, unreadable. "We need to talk." They walked to the far side of the compound, out of earshot of Ruth and her assistants. James stood with his back to the fence, arms crossed. "I've been fielding calls from headquarters for 3 days. They want to know why we've diverted resources to one animal. They want to know why our senior ranger has abandoned his post. They want to know—" He stopped, took a breath. "They want to know if you're still capable of doing this job." "And what did you tell them?" "I told them you were conducting field research, extended observation of rehabilitation protocols." James's jaw tightened. "I lied for you, Daniel, again." Daniel said nothing. "The cub, how is she improving?" "Ruth says another few weeks, maybe a month, and she'll be ready for release evaluation." "Good. Fine." James unfolded his arms, refolded them, and Quito. The question hung between them. "The paperwork," James said. "I can't keep dodging it. Friday is the absolute deadline. If those forms aren't signed and submitted, then what? Then I sign them for you, and it goes on your record as non-compliance?" Daniel looked toward the enclosure. Through the window, he could see Quito lying beside the wire, the cub pressed against it from the other side. "He's not ready. He's 9 years old. His hips are failing. His stamina's half what it was 2 years ago." James stepped closer. "I've covered for you because I respect what you've done here, but respect doesn't change biology. That dog is at the end of his working life. And me." James didn't answer immediately. When he spoke, his voice was quieter. "Headquarters is reviewing your position. They've received recommendations not from me that your judgment has been compromised, that your attachment to certain cases has exceeded professional bounds." Attachment. Their word, not mine. Daniel turned to face him fully. "I've given this organization 15 years. I've tracked more poaching networks than anyone in the sector. I've trained half the rangers currently in the field. And now my judgment is compromised because I saved one cub. It's not about the cub." James held his gaze. "It's about the pattern, the isolation, the refusal to follow protocol, the way you've been living, Daniel, like you're waiting for something to end." The words landed. Daniel felt them in his chest, heavy and precise. He thought about the drawer full of unsent letters, the photograph in his wallet, the sunrise over the Serengeti on the morning Ellen died. "Maybe I am," James exhaled. "Then maybe it's time to figure out what you're waiting for." He walked back to the Jeep, opened the door, paused. "Friday. Daniel, the paperwork. Don't make me do something neither of us wants." The engine started. The Jeep pulled away, trailing dust. Daniel stood alone in the compound, the sun beating down on his shoulders. Inside the enclosure, Quito raised his head, looked toward the window, toward Daniel. The cub followed his gaze. 2 pairs of eyes. Watching. Waiting. And somewhere in Daniel's pocket, his phone buzzed with a message he hadn't checked in 3 days. He pulled it out, looked at the screen. The sender's name made his heart stop. Nathan. Daniel stared at the screen. 3 words. That was all. "Did you get my card?" His thumb hovered over the message. The phone felt heavy in his palm, heavier than it had any right to be. 7 years. 7 years of silence, of birthday cards sent into the void, of phone calls that went to voicemail and were never returned. And now this. He didn't know what it meant, didn't know if it was an opening or a closing. Didn't know if Nathan was reaching out or simply confirming the address was correct before cutting the last thread. Daniel had sent a card 3 weeks ago. Nathan's 32nd birthday. Same thing he'd written every year. Thinking of you. Hope you're well. Dad. He put the phone back in his pocket. Not now. He couldn't deal with this now. The sun was dropping toward the western hills. In 2 hours, it would be dark. James's warning echoed in his head, the poachers, still in the area. The patrol that hadn't found them. The tracks that led northwest and disappeared into the bush. Daniel walked back to the enclosure. Ruth met him at the door. You look like someone walked over your grave. I need to go back to the outpost. Night patrol? Ruth's eyebrows rose. James pulled you off active duty. James doesn't get to decide what I do on my own time. She studied him for a long moment. Then she stepped aside. The cub's stable. She'll be here when you get back. Daniel nodded, whistled for Quito. The dog rose slowly, his hind legs stiff from lying on the concrete. He looked at the enclosure, at the cub watching through the wire, then back at Daniel. I know, boy. We'll come back. They drove through the fading light, the Jeep's headlights cutting a narrow path through the gathering dusk. The outpost appeared as a dark shape against the purple sky, no lights in the windows. No movement in the yard. Daniel parked, checked his equipment, knife, flashlight, radio, no gun. Rangers in this sector weren't issued firearms. Too much risk of escalation. Headquarters said, too much liability. He clipped the radio to his belt and headed for the northern boundary. The night patrol route followed the river for 3 kilometers, then curved east along the ridge. Daniel had walked it 1,000 times. He knew every gully, every thicket, every place where the grass grew tall enough to hide a man. Quito moved ahead, nose to the ground. His gait was uneven, the left hip giving him trouble again, but his focus was sharp, alert. They walked for an hour. Nothing. The moon rose, 3/4 full, casting silver light across the savanna. Daniel stopped at the ridge, scanning the terrain below. Empty. Still. He was about to turn back when Quito froze. The dog's body went rigid. Ears forward, nose working the air, Daniel dropped to one knee, listened. Wind through grass. The distant call of a nightjar, and underneath it, faint, almost imperceptible, the smell of wood smoke. He followed Quito's gaze. Northwest, toward a cluster of rocks 1/2 kilometer away. The same direction the tire tracks had led. Daniel pulled out his radio, pressed the transmit button. Base, this is Mercer. Possible activity at grid reference 749er. Requesting backup. Static. Then James's voice, thick with sleep. Daniel, what are you doing out there? Night patrol. I told you. Smoke, northwest of the ridge. Someone's out here. A long pause. Hold your position. I'm sending a team. 20 minutes. Copy. He clipped the radio back, looked at Quito. The dog was already moving, slipping through the grass toward the rocks. Daniel followed. They covered the distance in 15 minutes, moving low, using the terrain for cover. The smell of smoke grew stronger, and with it, another smell, the iron tang of blood. Daniel's stomach tightened. They reached the edge of the rock cluster. He pressed his back against a boulder, peered around the edge. 2 men, sitting by a small fire, flames low and nearly hidden by the surrounding stones. Between them, strung up on a wooden frame, the hide of a zebra, freshly skinned. Snares and wire coils lay scattered nearby. A rifle leaned against one of the rocks, bolt action. Scope mounted on top. Daniel counted. 2 men. 1 gun visible. Possibly more weapons he couldn't see. He should wait. James was sending backup. 20 minutes. But the men were packing up, rolling the snares, preparing to move. If they left now, they'd vanish into the bush. Again. Quito growled. Low, soft. Daniel put a hand on his collar. The men looked up. One of them reached for the rifle. Daniel stepped into the firelight. Tanzania Wildlife Authority. Put down the weapon. The man's hand stopped. He squinted through the smoke. The American. His voice carried an accent South African. Maybe. Hard to tell. I've heard about you. The old one who thinks he can save everything. Put down the weapon. The man didn't move. His companion, younger, thinner, rose to his feet, hands loose at his sides. You're alone, the first man said. One old ranger and a dog. What are you going to do, arrest us? Backup is on the way. Is it? The man smiled. His teeth were yellow in the firelight. We've been watching this sector for weeks. We know your patrol routes, your response times, your retirement policies. Daniel's grip tightened on his knife. You killed a lioness 2 days ago. Shot her and left her cub to die in a snare. We set snares for zebra. Lions get caught sometimes. Cost of doing business. The cub survived. The man shrugged. Good for the cub. The younger one shifted. His hand moved toward his belt. Quito saw it before Daniel did. The dog launched forward, not attacking, but positioning himself between Daniel and the threat. A barrier, a warning. The younger man stopped. His hand hovered near his hip, not quite touching whatever was concealed there. Quito's growl deepened. It came from somewhere in his chest, low and sustained, a sound that carried more weight than any words. The older man looked at the dog, at Daniel, at the darkness beyond the firelight. You're making a mistake. Old man, we have friends, connections. This isn't some small-time operation you can shut down with a knife and a dog. I tracked your network 7 years ago. The man's expression shifted, just slightly. What? 7 years ago? Same snare patterns, same caliber ammunition, same territory. Daniel's voice was flat, steady. I was 3 weeks into the operation when I got called away. Family emergency. By the time I got back, you'd scattered. You're mistaken. I'm not. Daniel pulled the shell casing from his pocket, held it up. 375. Same as the one I found at your camp 7 years ago. Same as the one I found next to the lioness. The older man's eyes narrowed. So, what? You want revenge, justice. You're not a cop. You don't have a gun. You don't have anything. The sound of engines cut through the night. The younger man turned. Headlights appeared on the ridge, bouncing through the darkness. 3 vehicles, Daniel said. Maybe 12 rangers. More than enough to secure this site and track you if you run. The older man looked at the approaching lights. At Daniel, at Quito, still positioned between them, hackles raised. This isn't over. No, Daniel agreed. It's not. The man grabbed the rifle. For one terrible second, Daniel thought he would fire. Then he threw it into the bush and ran. His companion followed, both of them vanishing into the darkness beyond the firelight. Daniel didn't pursue. His knees wouldn't allow it. And Quito was too old for that kind of chase. He stood by the dying fire, breathing hard, his hand still clenched around the shell casing. The jeeps arrived 2 minutes later. James was in the lead vehicle. You disobeyed a direct order. He climbed out, flashlight sweeping the abandoned camp. You could have been killed. They were about to leave. Another 10 minutes and they'd have been gone. And if they'd had more than one gun, if there'd been 4 of them instead of 2. Daniel didn't answer. He knew James was right. He also knew he'd do it again. James surveyed the scene. The snares. The zebra hide. The tire tracks leading into the bush. They left the rifle. Threw it. Over there. James directed 2 rangers to retrieve it. Evidence. Forensics. The slow machinery of law beginning to turn. Go home. Daniel. James's voice was quieter now. Get some sleep. We'll need your statement tomorrow. Daniel nodded, started walking toward his jeep. Quito followed, moving slower now. The adrenaline was fading. The old dog's hips were stiffening again, each step more labored than the last. They drove back to the outpost in silence. Daniel parked in the yard, killed the engine. His hands were shaking. He hadn't noticed during the confrontation. The focus, the tension, they'd masked everything. But now, in the quiet, his body was catching up. He sat in the driver's seat, gripping the steering wheel, waiting for the tremors to pass. Quito rested his head on Daniel's knee. "I know, boy." The dog's tail moved, once, weakly. They sat like that until the first light touched the eastern sky. Ruth found him 3 hours later. He was sitting on the step outside his quarters. Quito, asleep at his feet. He hadn't moved, hadn't slept, just sat, watching the sunrise paint the savannah in shades of gold and rose. "James told me what happened." Daniel didn't look up. "Which part? All of it." She lowered herself onto the step beside him. "You're either brave or stupid. I still haven't decided. Let me know when you figure it out." Almost a joke. The first one since Nathan's message. Ruth didn't laugh, but she didn't leave either. They sat in silence, watching the light grow. Finally, Ruth spoke. "The cub took solid food this morning. Stood on her own for 3 minutes. That's good. It's remarkable." She shook her head. 30 years, Daniel. I've learned not to expect miracles, but sometimes they show up anyway." Daniel reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone. The message was still there, unanswered. "Did you get my card?" Ruth glanced at the screen. Didn't comment. "Someone important. My son. Didn't know you had one. Most days. Neither do I." Ruth studied him, that same sharp assessing gaze she'd used on the cub when they first brought her in. "James told me something else. He's recommending your suspension. Formal review of your conduct." Daniel nodded. He'd expected that. "And the dog? The paperwork's due today." "I know." Ruth stood, brushed dust from her trousers. "For what it's worth," she said, "I think you did the right thing last night. Both of you." She walked away, her footsteps fading into the morning quiet. Daniel looked at the phone, at the message, at the cursor blinking in the empty reply field. His thumb moved toward the screen, then stopped. From inside the outpost, his radio crackled. James's voice, sharp and urgent. "Daniel, we have a problem. Get to the center, now." The cub was fine. A minor reaction to the medication. Ruth had adjusted the dosage by the time Daniel arrived, breathless and shaking. False alarm, but the real blow came 3 days later. The jeep from regional headquarters pulled into the compound at noon. 2 men climbed out, suits wrinkled from the long drive, clipboards in hand. Daniel recognized the type. Bureaucrats. Men who made decisions from behind desks and never spent a night in the bush. They didn't shake his hand. "Mr. Mercer, we're here regarding the incidents of the past several weeks." Daniel stood at attention in the yard, the sun beating down on his bare head. Ruth watched from the doorway of the treatment building. James stood near the gate, arms crossed, saying nothing. The taller official read from his clipboard. Each word landed like a small hammer. "Abandonment of assigned post. Failure to follow direct orders. Unauthorized engagement with suspected poachers. Reckless endangerment of self and department resources." Daniel said nothing. There was nothing to say. "Additionally, we've received reports of emotional instability. Excessive attachment to certain cases. Behavior inconsistent with the professional standards expected of senior personnel." Emotional instability. The words hung in the air, sharp-edged and precise. "Do you have anything to say in your defense?" "Mr. Mercer." Daniel thought about the cub, about Quito, about the poachers who had vanished into the bush while headquarters debated response protocols. "No." The official nodded, checked a box on his form. Effective immediately. You are suspended from all duties pending formal review. Your badge, radio, and keys to department facilities are to be surrendered. Daniel reached for his belt, unclipped the radio, set it on the hood of the Jeep. The badge came next. 15 years of service, reduced to a small piece of metal in his palm. He set it beside the radio. The keys, equipment shed, vehicle pool, the main gate, one by one, he placed them on the hood. Each one lighter than it should have been. Each one heavier than he could bear. The official gathered them without ceremony. Dropped them into a canvas bag. Additionally, the K-9 unit designated Quito is to be transferred to the training facility in Arusha for retirement processing. Transport will arrive Friday morning. Daniel's hands clenched at his sides. He's not ready. That determination has been made by veterinary staff and confirmed by regional command. The official didn't look up from his clipboard. The matter is not open for discussion. James stepped forward. Mr. Mercer will cooperate fully. Won't you? Daniel. The words were a warning. Daniel heard what James wasn't saying. Don't make this worse. Don't give them more ammunition. He nodded. Once. The officials climbed back into their Jeep. The engine started. They drove away, leaving nothing but dust and silence. James approached. His face was tight, controlled. I'm sorry, Daniel. I tried to... Did you? The question hung between them. James's jaw worked, but no words came out. Daniel walked away. He didn't look back. Friday morning arrived like a sentence. The transport vehicle pulled into the compound at 8 a.m. A white truck with government markings on the door. A kennel in the back, metal bars, hard floor. Daniel walked Quito from the treatment building to the truck. Each step felt like wading through water. His legs didn't want to move. His body knew what his mind refused to accept. Quito walked beside him, tail wagging. The dog didn't understand. He thought they were going somewhere together, going on patrol, going to work. The handler opened the kennel door, waited. Daniel knelt in the dirt, eye level with the dog. Quito's tail wagged faster. His tongue lolled out, panting in the morning heat. Those brown eyes, trusting, patient, loyal, looked at Daniel the way they always had, the way they'd looked for 9 years. Daniel tried to speak. The words lodged in his throat like stones. His hand moved to Quito's head, the gray fur, soft and warm, and the familiar shape of his skull. The ears that twitched at every sound. Go on, he managed. His voice cracked. Go on, boy. Quito didn't move. He leaned into Daniel's hand, the way he always did, seeking contact, seeking reassurance. Go on. The dog looked at the kennel, back at Daniel. His tail slowed. The handler cleared his throat. Sir, we need to... I know. Daniel stood. His knees protested. His back ached. He was 58 years old and felt every day of it. He pointed at the kennel. Up? Quito hesitated. Then, because he was a good dog, because he'd always been a good dog, he climbed into the kennel. The handler closed the door. The metal clanged shut. Quito turned, pressed his nose to the bars. His eyes found Daniel's through the wire. The truck engine started. Daniel stood in the yard, watching as the vehicle pulled away, watching as it rounded the corner, disappeared behind the acacia trees, became a dust cloud on the horizon. He stood there until the dust settled, until there was nothing left to see. Then his legs gave out. He sat in the dirt, the red dust of the Serengeti that had been part of him for 15 years. It coated his hands, his trousers, worked its way into the creases of his palms. He sat there until the sun moved across the sky, until shadows lengthened and the heat began to fade. No one came to check on him. Ruth was busy with the cub. James was avoiding him. The other rangers had heard what happened and were keeping their distance. This was what he'd earned. This was what he deserved. That night, Daniel sat alone in his quarters. The room was small. Bare walls, a cot, a desk, a drawer full of things he never looked at. He opened the drawer. 53 letters. 7 years of words he'd never sent. He pulled them out, one by one. Read them by the light of a single lamp. Dear Nathan, I know you probably won't read this, but I needed to tell you. Dear Nathan, your mother's birthday was yesterday. I sat outside and watched the sunset, and I thought about... Dear Nathan, I saw a photograph of you in the alumni magazine. You looked happy. I hope you are. I hope. Each letter was the same, an apology that circled but never landed, explanations that sounded like excuses, words that said everything except the one thing that mattered. He'd never written those words. Not once in 53 letters, because writing them would mean admitting what he'd done. Admitting that he'd chosen strangers over family, chosen duty over love, or chosen the comfortable distance of work over the terrifying closeness of grief. He'd told himself he was serving something larger, protecting wildlife, fighting poachers, making a difference. But the poachers were still here, still killing, still vanishing into the bush while men like him filed reports and followed protocols. And Ellen was still dead. And Nathan still hated him. And Quito was in a kennel in Arusha, alone, confused, waiting for someone who would never come. Daniel set the letters down. His hands were shaking again, not from adrenaline this time, from something worse. He looked around the room, at the bare walls, the empty cot, the silence that pressed in from every direction. This was what he'd built with his life, this emptiness, this exile. He lay down on the cot, stared at the ceiling. The ceiling had no answers, and somewhere in his pocket, his phone buzzed again, Nathan's name on the screen. A new message. I'm coming to Tanzania. We need to talk. Don't run this time. 3 days passed. Daniel packed his bags, 2 duffel bags, that was all, 15 years in Tanzania, and everything he owned fit into 2 canvas sacks. He moved through the quarters mechanically. Clothes, books, a few photographs, the drawer full of letters he pulled out, held for a moment, then stuffed into the bottom of the larger bag, a knock at the door. Ruth stood on the threshold. Her face was drawn, pale beneath the tan. The cub... Daniel's hand stopped. What happened? She won't eat, won't move, won't respond to anything I try. Ruth stepped into the room, her eyes sweeping across the half-packed bags. 2 days since Quito left. She's been declining ever since. The infection. It's not the infection. The infection's cleared. This is something else. Ruth's voice tightened. She's looking for him, Daniel. Every time someone opens the door, her head comes up, and when it's not him, she just stops. Daniel set down the shirt he was holding. What do you want me to do about it? I don't know. I don't... Ruth pressed her palm against her forehead. I've been doing this work for 30 years. I've seen animals give up. I've seen them stop fighting for no medical reason at all, but I've never seen it happen because of a bond like this. It's not true imprinting, more like trauma bonding. He was the first safety she knew after everything fell apart. She attached to him, and now he's gone. Ruth looked at him directly. She's dying, Daniel. Not from the wound, not from infection. She's dying because the only thing that made her want to live is gone. I'd give her maybe 48 hours, maybe less. The words landed in the silence of the room. Daniel looked at his bags, at the letters buried at the bottom, at the bare walls that had been his home for 15 years. I've been dismissed. I have no authority here anymore. I know. Even if I wanted to help, I couldn't. The dog's in Arusha, government facility. I can't just walk in and... I know. Ruth's voice was quiet. I'm not asking you to do anything. I'm just telling you what's happening. She turned toward the door, stopped with her hand on the frame. But if that cub dies because we separated them, I don't know how I'll live with it. She paused. And I don't think you will either. The door closed behind her. Daniel stood alone in the empty room. The easier path was clear. Finish packing. Drive to the airport. Fly home to Montana, home to what an apartment he hadn't seen in 3 years. A town where no one remembered him. A son who was coming to Tanzania to confront him about everything he'd done wrong. He could leave. Let someone else deal with the cub. Let the system process Keto's retirement. Let the bureaucrats shuffle their papers and check their boxes. It would be easier. Cleaner. He'd already been dismissed. His reputation was already in ruins. What more could they take from him? He sat on the edge of the cot. The photograph was in his wallet. Ellen and Nathan. 15 years ago. He didn't take it out. Didn't need to. He knew every detail by heart. Ellen's voice, from a memory so old it had worn smooth. You're not someone who walks away, Daniel. That's why I married you. But he had walked away. From her hospital bed. From Nathan's phone calls. From the funeral where he'd stood on the opposite side of the grave and couldn't find the words to bridge the distance. He'd called it duty. Called it necessity. Called it everything except what it was. Fear. Fear of being present when things fell apart. Fear of watching the people he loved suffer and being unable to stop it. Fear of grief. Of loss. Of the terrible closeness of holding someone's hand while they slipped away. He'd spent 15 years in Africa, running from that fear, hiding behind work that felt noble but cost him everything that mattered. And now he was going to walk away again. The cub was dying, Keto was alone, and Daniel was packing his bags, and he stood up, walked to the window. The savannah stretched out before him, golden in the afternoon light. Nathan's message was still on his phone. I'm coming to Tanzania. We need to talk. Don't run this time. Don't run. His whole life had been running. From Ellen's illness, from Nathan's grief, from his own guilt. Running toward work, toward purpose, toward anything that kept him from sitting still long enough to feel what he'd done. The cub wasn't asking him to be brave. Keto wasn't asking him to be a hero. They just needed someone to show up. Daniel picked up his keys. The training facility sat 4 hours east of the outpost, on the outskirts of Arusha. Government buildings, chain-link fences, rows of kennels baking in the afternoon sun. Daniel parked outside the main gate. A guard approached young, bored, official. Purpose of visit. Personal. I'm here to see the facility manager. The guard checked his clipboard, made a call, waved him through. Daniel walked across the compound to the administrative building. His boots crunched on gravel. His heart pounded in his chest not from fear, but from something closer to resolve. The door opened before he reached it. Walter Brennan stood on the threshold. 65 years old, gray beard, eyes that had seen too much and stopped being surprised by any of it. Danny Mercer. He didn't extend his hand, just leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. Wondered when you'd show up. You knew I was coming. I heard what happened. Suspension, review, the whole mess. Walter shook his head. Headquarters loves making examples, makes them feel like they're accomplishing something. I'm here for my dog. I figured. Walter glanced toward the kennels. He hasn't eaten since he arrived. Just lies by the fence, facing east, like he's waiting for something. Daniel's throat tightened. I need to take him back. Can't authorize that. Not officially. You're suspended. He's been transferred to government custody. The paperwork. I'm not asking for paperwork. Walter studied him. The years between them. The shared work, the operations they'd run together back when Daniel was still young enough to believe the system worked. You know what happens if you take him without authorization. Yes? Career over. Possibly charges, at minimum. They'll make sure you never work conservation again. I know. And you're going to do it anyway. Daniel met his eyes. There's a lion cub at the rescue center. She's dying because we took him away from her. Ruth Parker says she's got maybe 48 hours, maybe less. Walter was quiet for a long moment, then he straightened, stepped back into the building. Gates around back. Keypad code is 4729. He paused at the door. I'll be inside doing paperwork. Takes me about 15 minutes. After that, I'll have to report any irregularities. If anyone asks later, he escaped on his own. I'll handle the forms. He closed the door. Daniel walked around the building. The kennel block stretched in a long row, each unit separated by chain-link dividers. Dogs barked as Daniel passed young ones, eager, still full of energy. The last kennel was quiet. Quito lay on the concrete floor, his back to the door. His ribs were more visible than they'd been 3 days ago. His gray coat had lost its shine. Daniel crouched at the wire. Hey, boy. The dog's ear twitched. Nothing else. Quito. Slowly, painfully. The old dog turned his head. For a moment, his eyes were empty, dull, the eyes of an animal that had stopped expecting anything. Then recognition flickered, the tail moved, once, twice. Quito rose, his hind legs shaking, barely supporting his weight, and walked to the wire, his nose pressed against the gap between the chain-link diamonds. Daniel punched in the code. The gate swung open. He stepped inside. Quito didn't jump, didn't bark. He simply walked forward, one careful step at a time, until his body pressed against Daniel's legs. Daniel knelt on the concrete. The floor was hard, cold, covered in dust and old straw. He wrapped his arms around Quito's neck, buried his face in the gray fur. The dog smelled like the kennel antiseptic. Concrete. Loneliness. I'm sorry. His voice broke. I'm sorry. I let them take you. Quito's tail wagged against his leg. I'm sorry I wasn't there. For you. For Ellen. For Nathan. For all of it. The dog leaned into him, his full weight resting against Daniel's chest, the way he used to do when he was young. Before either of them got old, Daniel held him. When he finally stood, his knees ached and his eyes burned, but his hands had stopped shaking. Come on, boy. Let's go home. They walked out of the kennel together, across the compound, through the back gate. Walter's office window overlooked the parking lot. Daniel didn't look up, didn't wave, didn't acknowledge what the man had done. Some debts couldn't be repaid with words. He opened the Jeep door. Quito climbed in slower than before, but steadier. They drove west, toward the setting sun. The rescue center appeared as the last light faded from the sky. Ruth was waiting at the gate. She didn't speak, just opened the door and stepped aside. Daniel carried nothing. Quito walked beside him, his gait unsteady but determined. They moved through the corridor to the cub's enclosure. The room was dim, lit only by the monitors and a single lamp in the corner. The cub lay in the far corner. Her eyes were closed. Her ribs rose and fell in shallow, uneven rhythms. She looked smaller than Daniel remembered, diminished, fading. Quito stopped at the wire, lowered himself to the floor, pressed his nose against the gap beneath the door. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the cub's nose twitched, her head lifted. Slowly, as if the effort cost her everything she had left. Her eyes opened amber, clouded, searching. She saw him. The transformation was not dramatic. There was no sudden leap, no burst of energy. She simply rose. One leg at a time, shaking, unsteady, but rising. She walked to the fence, each step deliberate, each step a decision to keep moving. When she reached the wire, she pressed her face against it, as close to Quito as she could get. The old dog didn't move, just breathed. The cub lay down next to the fence, her body curled against the wire, her nose nearly touching his. Ruth stood in the doorway, her hand pressed against her mouth. An hour passed. Then 2. The cub accepted water, then food, a small amount, but more than she'd taken in days. By morning, her breathing had steadied, her eyes were clearer. Ruth checked her vitals, checked them again. The fever's broken. Her voice was barely above a whisper. I don't understand it. There's no medical explanation for this. She stopped, shook her head. 30 years, she said. 30 years of this work. I've never seen anything like that. Daniel watched the cub, watched Quito, the two of them, separated by wire, connected by something he couldn't name. Some things don't need explaining. That night, Daniel didn't write a letter. He sat outside the treatment building, his phone in his hand. The screen glowed in the darkness. Nathan's number. He knew it by heart. Had dialed it 100 times and hung up before it rang. His thumb moved. The phone rang. Once, twice, 3 times. He prepared for voicemail, rehearsed what he would say. But Nathan answered. Hello. Daniel's throat closed. The words he'd practiced vanished. Nathan. It's... His voice cracked. It's your father. Silence. The silence of 7 years, compressed into a single breath. I know who it is. I'm not calling to make excuses. I don't have any left. Daniel gripped the phone tighter. I just needed to say I'm sorry. I'm sorry I wasn't there. I'm sorry I made you carry that alone. I'm sorry for all of it. The connection hummed. Static. Distance. Why now? Nathan's voice was flat, guarded. Why call now? After all this time. Because I stopped running. Daniel's eyes burned. Because I've spent 7 years pretending it didn't matter, and it doesn't work. Because I miss you, and I miss your mother, and I don't know how to fix what I broke, but I had to try. More silence. Then Nathan spoke again, quieter. She didn't hate you, even at the end. Daniel couldn't breathe. She was angry. We both were, but she told me, Nathan's voice caught. She said you were trying to save something. She just wished you'd let someone save you too. The words hit Daniel like a physical blow. He bent forward, his free hand pressed against his knee. I'm not ready to forgive you. Nathan's voice was steady now, controlled. I don't know if I ever will be, but maybe we could talk. Start there. I'd like that. Daniel's voice was rough, broken. I'd like that more than you know. I'll see you next week. Don't run this time. The line went dead. Daniel sat in the darkness, the phone still pressed to his ear. The stars above were thick and bright. The same stars Ellen had loved, back in Montana, before everything changed. He didn't move for a long time. 2 months later, the cub was ready. They drove to a protected release area 300 square kilometers of conservancy, monitored by camera and patrol. Ruth sat in the passenger seat. Quito rode in the back, his head resting on the edge of the window. The cub traveled in a transport crate, restless now, sensing the open space ahead. James had called the week before. The poachers had been arrested at the border, the rifle's serial number traced back to a larger network. Charges were pending. It wasn't justice, not completely, but it was something. They stopped at a clearing. Tall grass stretched to the horizon. A herd of zebra grazed in the distance, unconcerned. Daniel opened the crate. The cub stepped out, tested the air, looked around at a world that was hers by birthright. She turned back. Her amber eyes found Quito first, then Daniel. Something passed between them. Not gratitude animals didn't think that way. Something simpler. The acknowledgement of one survivor to another. Then she moved forward, into the grass, into whatever came next. She didn't look back. Ruth watched the grass sway where the cub had disappeared. Think she'll make it. Daniel didn't answer. Some questions weren't meant to be answered. Later, on the ridge overlooking the river, he checked his phone. A text from Nathan Flight lands on the 15th. We'll figure out the rest when I get there. He read it 3 times. Quito lay beside him, muzzle resting in the red dust. The sun was setting over the Serengeti, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. We did all right, Daniel said quietly. Quito's tail moved. Once. That was enough. There's a quiet that settles after a story like this one. Not the kind that needs filling. Just a stillness that sits with you for a while. The way certain memories do, heavy in the chest, tender at the edges. Some of us have stood where Daniel stood. Not in Africa. Maybe. Not with a dog and a lion cub. But in that place where the years pile up and the mistakes feel permanent, where the phone sits in your hand and the number you need to dial feels impossible to press. Many of us have carried something we never said out loud, a letter never sent, a call never made, a door we closed and couldn't figure out how to open again. And perhaps you're sitting with something like that right now, something unfinished, something that aches when you let yourself feel it. That's all right. It doesn't need to be resolved tonight. Some things just need to be held for a while longer. Some doors open when we least expect them to. Thank you for staying with us through this story. Thank you for listening.